There is a silence over them right now. And I need you to understand this clearly. It is not calm. It is shock. It is the kind of silence that falls when people realize they have touched someone they were never authorized to touch. They thought you were the easy one, the quiet one, the gentle one, the one who would take the damage, swallow the pain, stay small, and never expose what was really happening. They looked at you and said, "This person will not fight back." But what they did not know, what they completely failed to calculate, is that your softness was never weakness. Your silence was never surrender. Your kindness was never permission. Something has shifted, and they can feel it. The group that once moved with confidence is now moving with fear. The voices that once gathered against you are starting to lose their rhythm. The energy is breaking apart. The structure is cracking. And the wild part is, you did not have to chase them, curse them, argue with them, or prove anything to them. You just kept standing. You kept moving. You kept becoming. And that alone has shaken the entire atmosphere around them. This message is not for everybody. But if it is for you, you already know. Something in your spirit is reacting right now because you have felt this exact shift. You have felt people acting strange. You have felt conversations changing. You have felt the pressure lifting, the darkness exposing itself, the hidden things coming to the surface without you forcing them. That is not random. That is divine confirmation. They thought they were fighting a harmless person, but they were actually fighting someone covered by God, watched by angels, and carried by a purpose bigger than their little circle could ever understand. They thought they had numbers. They thought they had influence. They thought they had the advantage, but they never saw who was standing behind you. They never saw the prayers. They never saw the protection. They never saw the hand of heaven moving in silence while you were being strengthened in places they could not reach. And now they are stunned because the person they expected to break is still here. Clearer, stronger, sharper, and more dangerous to every lie they built. If this is hitting your spirit, comment, "I am protected, chosen, and covered by God." Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to know that what tried to bury them just became the proof that God was with them. Because what comes next is the part they never saw coming. They mistook your gentleness for weakness, and that was the first crack in their whole plan. See, they looked at the way you carried yourself, the way you avoided unnecessary conflict, the way you gave people chances, the way you stayed quiet when you could have exposed everything. And they thought, this person is easy. They really believed that. They believed your patience meant you had no boundaries. They believed your kindness meant you had no discernment. They believed your soft voice meant there was no authority in your spirit. And because they believed that lie, they got bold. They started moving like there would be no consequence. They started saying things they should have never said, touching places they should have never touched, gathering people they should have never gathered, because in their mind, you were not dangerous. You were not protected. You were not someone heaven would defend. But that is where they misread the entire situation. Your gentleness was not an open door. It was discipline. Your restraint was not fear. It was maturity. Your refusal to fight dirty was not because you could not fight. It was because God was teaching you how to let Him handle battles that were too deep to be won by human noise. They thought power had to look loud. They thought strength had to come with threats, anger, and public reaction. But chosen ones do not always move like that. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who has learned how to stay still while heaven moves. Sometimes the one they call harmless is the one carrying the heaviest covering. Look at David. Before he stood before Goliath, people underestimated him because he did not look like a warrior. He looked too young. too small, too unlikely. But the oil was already on him. The calling was already in him. The victory was already assigned before the giant ever opened his mouth. And that is what they failed to understand about you. They judged you by appearance, by tone, by silence, by the fact that you did not immediately strike back. But God was not measuring you by what they could see. He was building something in you that their little circle could not calculate. And while they were counting how many people were on their side, heaven was revealing something they could not see. You were never alone. Even in the moments when the room felt empty and nobody seemed to understand what was happening to you. That is the part they could not see. They saw your face, your silence, your tired eyes. Maybe even the way you kept showing up like nothing was hurting you. But they did not see the invisible covering around your life. They did not see the nights when you almost broke. But something inside you whispered, "Keep going." They did not see the strange warnings in your spirit. The sudden knowing, the quiet pull that told you when to speak, when to step back, when to leave a conversation, when to stop explaining yourself to people who had already chosen a false version of you. And I need you to hear this deeply. That was not luck. That was not coincidence. That was divine guidance. God was leading you through places where human eyes could not protect you. Heaven was moving before you had language for what was happening. There were traps you avoided without knowing they were traps. There were people you stopped trusting before you had proof. There were doors that closed, and at first it hurt. But later you realized that door was not rejection. It was rescue. This is why their plan could not fully work. They were calculating from the outside, but God was instructing you from the inside. They were using rumors, pressure, and numbers. But you were being led by something higher than their noise. And the Bible says in Isaiah 5:4-1-7, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." Notice, it does not say the weapon will not be formed. It may be formed. The conversation may be formed. The group may be formed. The accusation may be formed. The betrayal may be formed. But prosper, no. Prevail, no. Own your destiny, no. Not when God has placed His hand over your life. So if you have ever felt protected in a way you could not explain, if you have ever walked out of a situation and later realized heaven had pulled you out before the damage could reach your soul, come on. God covered me when I could not defend myself, because what they failed to understand is that they were never just dealing with you. They were dealing with the one who had already decided you would not be destroyed there. And that is exactly why the next part becomes even more powerful. While they were busy building a story about you, God was building something inside you they could not interrupt. That is the part that makes this whole situation so serious. They thought the pressure was going to make you unstable. They thought the whispers were going to make you desperate. They thought if they surrounded your name with enough confusion, you would start begging to be understood by people who were never interested in the truth. But something else happened. You got quieter in a different way. Not broken quiet. Not defeated quiet. Consecrated quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when God pulls you out of the noise and starts teaching you how to hear Him more clearly than you hear them. And maybe you did not even realize it at first. Maybe you just thought you were tired. Maybe you thought you were losing interest in certain conversations, certain people, certain places. But that was not emptiness. That was separation. God was removing your appetite for the very environments that once drained your spirit. He was teaching you that not every accusation deserves your explanation. Not every attack deserves your energy. And not every person who studies your life deserves access to your heart. They wanted a reaction, but heaven was training your restraint. They wanted you emotional, scattered, exposed, easy to label, easy to twist, easy to point at. But you started becoming harder to reach in the places where they used to control you. Your peace stopped being available for public negotiation. Your identity stopped depending on their approval. Your spirit began to recognize the difference between a battle you are called to face and a trap you are called to walk away from. And that right there terrified them more than any argument ever could. Because once you stop needing them to see you correctly, they lose the power to define you incorrectly. Do you feel that? Do you feel how much has changed inside you? If you are in a silent season right now, but you know God is changing you from the inside. Right? My silence is not weakness. It is preparation. Because while they were plotting your fall, heaven was preparing your rise. And preparation does something dangerous to every false circle. It exposes what was never built on truth. The strange thing about that group is that it was never as strong as it looked. From the outside, maybe it seemed organized. Maybe it looked like they all agreed. All stood together. All had the same story, the same confidence, the same attitude toward you. But underneath it, there was rot. There was jealousy wearing the mask of concern. There was insecurity pretending to be discernment. There were people standing beside each other who did not even truly trust one another. But they tolerated each other because they had found one thing to gather around you. You became the name they could mention when they needed to feel united. You became the subject they could twist when they needed a reason to sit at the same table. And that is why your presence disturbed them so deeply. You were not just a person to them. You were a mirror. Every time they looked at you, something in them had to face what they were not willing to heal. Your light exposed their motives without you making a speech. Your growth exposed their stagnation without you comparing yourself to them. Your peace exposed their chaos without you lifting a finger. And when a group is built on hidden envy, shared bitterness, and the need to make one person look small, it does not need much to collapse. It only needs truth to enter the room. That is what happened. Truth entered, not loudly, not dramatically, not with a crowd behind it. It entered through your refusal to keep playing the role they assigned you. You stopped feeding the version of you they needed in order to keep their story alive. You stopped shrinking into the corner they had prepared for you. And suddenly, they had nothing stable to stand on. So they began looking at each other differently. Questions started rising. Who said too much? Who changed sides? Who is no longer loyal? Who knows what? The suspicion they tried to plant around your name began growing inside their own circle. That is the judgment of a false foundation. It eventually becomes afraid of itself. And you need to understand this. You did not destroy what was pure. You did not break what was holy. You simply outgrew a lie. And when you outgrew it, everything attached to that lie started losing its power. But the collapse was not finished there, because the very trap they prepared for you was about to turn beneath their own feet. Every trap they prepared for you started turning beneath their own feet. And that is the part that has them shaken in a way they cannot admit out loud. They expected the damage to move in one direction, toward you, toward your name, toward your peace, toward your future. They thought the words they released would circle around your life like smoke and make it impossible for people to see you clear. They thought the pressure would bend you. They thought the isolation would weaken you. They thought if enough people agreed on the same lie, the lie would become strong enough to replace the truth. But heaven does not honor a lie just because many mouths repeat it. God does not surrender his chosen one just because a group decides to gather in darkness. What they sent out began to return. Slowly at first, quietly, almost invisibly, then suddenly, the same confusion they tried to place around you began moving through their own circle. The same suspicion they wanted others to feel about you began rising between them. The same division they planted near your name started growing in the soil of their own relationships. And now they are looking around, trying to understand why the atmosphere feels different, why the confidence is gone, why the people who once stood together are no longer standing with the same certainty. This is not revenge. This is not you becoming bitter. This is not you needing to destroy anyone to feel powerful. This is spiritual order correcting what human pride tried to corrupt. When something is built on dishonesty, it may look strong for a season, but it cannot survive the presence of truth. And you became the place where truth entered, not because you screamed it, not because you forced it, not because you exposed every hidden thing with your own hands. You simply stopped cooperating with the role they needed you to play. You stopped acting small enough for their story to make sense. You stopped carrying shame that did not belong to you. You stopped letting their opinion become the ceiling over your life. And when you stepped out of that false position, the whole structure lost balance. I need you to understand how serious this is. Some people are not shocked because they lost access to you. They are shocked because they lost control of the version of you they created in their minds. They needed you weak. They needed you confused. They needed you apologizing for wounds they caused. But now you are standing in a clarity they cannot manipulate. You are walking with a peace they cannot interrupt. You are becoming someone their old tactics cannot reach. And that is why the trap changed direction. The pit they dug became the place where their own motives were revealed. The weapon they formed became evidence against the hands that formed it. Psalm 235 says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Sometimes God does not remove every enemy before he blesses you. Sometimes he lets them watch the restoration they tried to prevent. He lets them see the person they underestimated rise with clean hands, a guarded heart, and a spirit that refused to become like them. So if you have seen God turn a situation around without you having to fight dirty, come on, God turned it around. Because what happened here was not ordinary. It was divine reversal. And the most powerful weapon in this entire battle was not noise, not revenge, not exposure. It was your silence. Your silence became the weapon they never knew how to fight, because it did not give them anything to twist. That is what made it so powerful. They were waiting for you to explode. They were waiting for one sentence, one emotional reaction, one moment of weakness they could pull out of context and use as proof that their story about you was true. They wanted noise from you because noise would have given them material. They wanted anger because anger would have made you easier to label. They wanted desperation because desperation would have made you easier to control. But you did not give them what they were hungry for. You stepped back. You watched. You listened. You let time speak. And time started saying things louder than your mouth ever could. See, there is a kind of silence that comes from fear. But that was not what was happening in you. There is also a kind of silence that comes from wisdom, from discernment, from the deep knowing that not every battle deserves your breath. That is the silence God was teaching you. The kind that does not beg to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. The kind that does not throw sacred energy into polluted conversations. The kind that lets false witnesses exhaust themselves while truth stands still and waits for its appointed moment. And this is why they became nervous. Your silence removed their script. They had lines prepared for the old version of you. The version that might over-explain, overgive, over-apologize, or run after people just to prove your heart was clean. But that version of you was no longer available. Something in you had matured beyond the need to perform innocence for people who were invested in your guilt. You did not scream. You did not chase. You did not beg. You did not lower yourself into the mud just because they were comfortable there. You stood, and the longer you stood, the more unstable their story became. Because a lie needs constant feeding. It needs reaction. It needs panic. It needs someone to keep touching it so it can keep looking alive. But when you withdrew your energy, their whole narrative began starving. That is why some of them started acting strange. That is why the atmosphere changed when you entered certain spaces. That is why people who once seemed confident around you suddenly did not know how to look at you the same way. Your silence carried a weight they did not expect. It was not empty. It was full of prayer, restraint, maturity, and divine timing. And now that they cannot reach the old version of you, some of them will try to return to the new one. But you need to be very careful about who is knocking and why. Be careful when they come back smiling, because not every return is repentance. Some people do not come back because their heart has changed. They come back because your absence started revealing what your presence used to cover. They come back because the door closed, and now they want to know if they can still reach you. They come back because the version of you they used to handle is gone, and they are trying to test whether the new you still has old access points. And I need you to listen with your spirit here. A soft voice can still carry manipulation. A friendly message can still carry an agenda. A sudden apology can still be more about fear than transformation. This does not mean you become bitter. This does not mean you walk around suspicious of every person. It means you stop confusing forgiveness with permission. You can forgive someone and still keep the door closed. You can pray for them and still refuse to hand them the keys to your peace again. You can love from a distance and still honor what God showed you in the season of exposure. Because when heaven reveals a pattern, it is not so you can decorate it and invite it back into your life. It is so you can discern it, release it, and move differently. Watch the fruit, not the performance. Watch consistency, not emotion. Watch whether their words are followed by humility, accountability, and changed behavior. Because anyone can miss you when they lose access. But not everyone is willing to repent for what they did when they had it. Tonight, take 7 quiet minutes. Write down the name of the group, the situation, or simply these words, the circle that tried to break me. Do not curse them. Do not rehearse revenge. Do not reopen every wound just to feel the pain again. Place your hand over that paper and pray. Lord, I release this battle to you. I choose peace, protection, and purpose. Close every door that was never assigned to my destiny. Then fold that paper and put it away. Or tear it as a sign that the old cycle no longer owns your spirit. This is not a ritual of hate. It is an act of surrender. It is you telling your soul, I am done carrying what God already exposed. Because what is coming next requires a version of you that is no longer emotionally chained to people heaven already removed. And if this is speaking to you, stay with me. Because the attack was never just an attack. It was preparation for your assignment. This was not just an attack. It was preparation for your assignment. And I know that may sound heavy, because when you were inside it, it did not feel like preparation. It felt unfair. It felt exhausting. It felt like people were being allowed to misunderstand you, misread you, and mishandle your name while you were trying to keep your heart from turning cold. But heaven was using even that season to train something in you that comfort could never have produced. You learned how to stand when people were not clapping. You learned how to keep your spirit clean when others were moving with hidden motives. You learned how to stop begging for a seat at tables where your presence was tolerated but your purpose was feared. And that matters. Because the place God is taking you cannot be entered with the same attachments that once kept you emotionally tied to people who were committed to your limitation. Some doors had to close. Some conversations had to end. Some people had to reveal themselves, not because God wanted to hurt you, but because He refused to let you walk into your next season blind. You needed to know who could celebrate your growth and who only liked you when you were small enough to manage. You needed to know who loved your light and who only loved the access they had to it. You needed to know who was assigned to your future and who was only connected to an older version of your pain. That group thought they were weakening you, but they were helping expose what could not go with you. They became part of the separation. They became part of the shaking. They became part of the evidence that your next level required cleaner air, stronger boundaries, and a deeper dependence on God. And now, look at what has changed. You do not see people the same way. You do not hand out trust the same way. You do not confuse attention with love, closeness with loyalty, or history with destiny. Something in you has become sharper, but not cruel, stronger, but not bitter, quieter, but not afraid. That is maturity. That is the fruit of surviving a season that was meant to crush you but ended up clarifying you. So do not reduce this to drama. Do not call it just betrayal. Do not call it just a group turning against you. This was training ground. This was spiritual development. This was God teaching you how to carry your calling without needing approval from people who were never assigned to understand it. The battle was painful, but it was not pointless. The pressure was real, but so was the purpose. And now the final word is not about them at all. It is about the person God is commanding you to become. The real victory was never that they fell apart. It was never that they finally became confused, exposed, or shaken by the very thing they tried to build against you. That may have happened. Yes, but that is not the crown. The crown is this: you are no longer shrinking to make people comfortable. You are no longer apologizing for the light God placed inside you. You are no longer begging to be understood by those who benefited from misunderstanding you. That is the victory. That is the shift. That is the moment heaven was leading you toward all along. Because when God calls someone, He does not call them to live as a smaller version of themselves just to keep false peace with people who fear their growth. He calls them higher. He calls them deeper. He calls them out of the corner, out of the confusion, out of the old identity, and into the fullness of what He already knew was inside them. And now you can feel it. Something in you does not fit the old place anymore. The old conversations feel too small. The old explanations feel unnecessary. The old fear does not have the same grip. You are walking into clarity. You are walking into freedom. You are walking into a season where your worth no longer needs to be voted on by people who never had authority over your destiny. Let them be shocked. Let them wonder. Let them try to understand how the person they counted out is still standing with clean hands and a stronger spirit. You do not have to perform your healing for them. You do not have to prove your innocence to them. You do not have to return to the version of you they knew how to control. God preserved you for purpose, not for captivity. He carried you through the pressure so you could come out with discernment, authority, and peace that cannot be easily stolen. So keep standing, keep shining, keep walking with your head lifted, not in pride, but in holy confidence. What could not break you has now become evidence that God was with you in the fire. If this message confirmed what your spirit has been feeling, comment, "I will not shrink again. God has called me higher." Like this video, subscribe for more prophetic encouragement, and share this with someone who needs to know that their silence was not weakness, it was divine protection. They are in shock because you survived, but heaven is not shocked at all, because heaven knew who you were before the battle ever began.